Hello everyone, welcome to Bridoire, the land of 1,001 chateaux in the heart of the Périgord. Périgord, for those who don't know, is an hour and a half east of Bordeaux, and Bridoire is right in the middle of the Montbazillac vineyards near Bergerac. And I'm delighted to introduce you to this place, which is steeped in a rather unusual history, since Bridoire has two histories in one. An ancient history dating back to the 12th century, a chateau that has survived many wars and many events, and a recent history, a chateau that has emerged from 30 years of looting and neglect since Bridoire was abandoned for the last 30 years. I invite you to follow me inside the castle grounds. It's now Easter period, there's a lot of going on, we're in Wonderland kind of, so don't be surprised if you see cards, keyholes or flowers, it sets the scene a little. So here we are, entering the 15th century Châtelet, fully enclosed by ramparts since Bridoire is actually built on a rocky peak. We'll see the ramparts which really close off this courtyard a bit later. Bridoire, as I was saying, dates back to the 12th century and was in fact a small keep used to watch over access to a passage at the level of the Gardenet, which is a small creek where there was a toll. So, unfortunately, little remains of the 12th century, but Bridoire has in fact extremely evolved over the centuries, and in particular, its structure, as we see it today, is more likely to date from the 16th century. We've got those big pepperbox towers that are so typical of the Périgord region. We've got tiled roofs rather than slate ones, and this very limestone, typical of the Bergerac region, since Montbazillac, for those who know it, also has this white limestone. And the further you go towards Sarladé, the Périgord region of castles that goes back thousands of years, the more you get this very yellow ochre stone. So Bridoire functioned as a castrum. Castrum, in fact, was a co-seigneury. With several families sharing the premises, the structure was totally different. The archives speak of alleyways, a communal oven, and a chapel. And so it's true that it's undergone a lot of changes over the centuries. Bridoire survived the 100 Years' War, but also the wars of religion, as it was a Protestant stronghold. There were no clashes during the wars of religion, as the Protestants went to the ground before the Catholics arrived. So, fortunately, it wasn't too badly damaged. Bridoire was divided up enormously, and the indivisions were very, very long, so it really wasn't until the 19th century that a family settled completely in Bridoire and fitted it out with 19th century comforts. So the 19th century marked a real turning point in the history of Bridoire because it was the first time that a family had really settled in and lived there, and so inevitably converted it to bring a little comfort to this large, somewhat austere fortress. So the Foucauld family took over Bridoire by marriage. The two large dormer windows on the main building bear the coats of arms of these two families. On the right, the three swords of the Souillac family. One of the Marquis de Soillac's daughters married a Foucauld in the early 19th century. And on the left, the lion rearing up, which is really the Foucauld emblem, and which will be hammered throughout the chateau to remind us that the Foucauld family, a great Périgord family, has really left its mark on the history of Bridoire. So, from the 19th century, you can see quite a few elements if you look at Bridoire's architecture. This tower has already been partially rebuilt. You can see the stonework, which has been stopped dead in its tracks. There's what's known as an ecoguet, a small turret, housing a staircase, which has a much more mechanical stone finish. You can really see it here, that was added at the end of the 19th century. These large dormers I mentioned earlier were added to the main building to bring in light, which is very important when you recover a medieval castle. We're really trying to bring light into these buildings. And now we're going to fit out the stables. We'll take a look at the horses later because Bridoire is a living stable. And all the interiors, I'll be able to show you interiors that have been completely refurbished with 19th century comfort. Let's go. This is the entrance hall. This whole area was added in the 17th century and contains a so-called Italian staircase. Don't be surprised by the decorations, we're in Wonderland. We're in this dining room, the showpiece of the chateau, which is really typical of the 19th century, with its large wood paneling and mantelpiece decorated with the Foucauld coat of arms and the lion, and also with vine leaves, to remind us that we're in a wine-growing region. In the 19th century, people liked to show their support for the king, so the ceiling is adorned with fleurs-de-lis. The Foucauld family really redeveloped Bridoire, bringing it up to date. Unfortunately, the family couldn't keep Bridoire, and in 1938, a Swiss family bought the chateau, who continued to maintain it and live there. And in 1978, the history of Bridoire changed completely, as Emperor Bokassa bought the chateau and its grounds via a somewhat fake company. This marked the beginning of a very, very slow agony for Bridoire. No janitor, no one on site, and little by little the chateau was turned over to pillage, and so for 30 years Bridoire was a place of squatting and perdition. The parquet floors were ripped out, the woodwork ripped out, the fireplaces were stolen, everything from the cellar to the attic was tagged, and of course there was no furniture left, as you'd expect. We couldn't intervene because the owner hadn't lodged any complaints about the chateau, and so fortunately there was an association of local people who rallied round to have the chateau listed as a historic monument so that we could intervene. So that's what happened. The chateau's interior and exterior were automatically classified by the state, and thanks to this, thanks to the law protecting historic monuments, the state was able to give the owner formal notice to carry out the work. When the owners failed to respond, the French government initiated expropriation proceedings. This is quite unique, since Bridoire was the only case of expropriation of a private property in France. It was a very, very long procedure. The association even went to court to defend Bridoire. As a result, the state found itself the owner of Bridoire with, as you can imagine, all the work to be done, since the chateau was really an empty shell, completely tagged, with brambles in the courtyard. It was really 30 years of abandonment and looting, so it was terrible. And so the French government issued a call for tenders to try and find buyers who would bring the place back to life and restore it at the same time. So my parents, who have a reputation for being crazy about chateaux, proposed a project and bought it from the state. It wasn't a gift, since the parents bought back 700,000 euros an entirely looted chateau, with no land and with the risk of saying, is a worthy acquisition, or are we really embarking on a completely mad adventure? So in 2011, my parents signed Bridoire, and in July 2012, they had to open it to the public for the first time in its history. And so it took just over 6 months of work with craftsmen and volunteers to really restore Bridoire. So we're going to stroll through the rooms of the chateau, and then I'm going to show you a little of what's been done. We don't see it very much because you see it furnished today, but Bridoire has come a long, long way. So right here in the dining room, half the parquet floor had been ripped out, so it was redone identically, as was the woodwork. So the panels were redone. This is the woodwork that was redone. This is the original woodwork. So all the sculptures adorning the woodwork were redone. And it's not just this one room, because the whole chateau, as I was saying, was really ransacked. So here we have this succession of very pleasant salons, since we are on the ground floor overlooking the courtyard. So here's the billiard room. There was no longer a fireplace. The chimney had been put back up. The ceiling was also extremely damaged. Obviously no fabrics on the wall, no furniture. It had a certain charm for the urbex, but it's true that Bridoire was in a really bad state. So here's the living room. I'm sorry about the rather fantasy decor, but the living room wasn't spared either. The fireplace had been stolen, so we found a very beautiful fireplace of the right dimensions, and it's never easy to find the right materials and furniture for the room. And so, 6 months of renovation work, starting with the ground floor, then progressively restoring the upper floors. So craftsmen who took turns to restore Bridoire, but also an army of volunteers who lent us their hands and time to restore the tiles. But they've also done some tasks like repainting, removing rubble, graffiti. In fact, they really paved the way for the craftsmen who then worked to finish the site on time. Here we come to a second mud room with a beautiful new cabochon tiling, which was completely ripped up when the parents took over Bridoire. This room isn't finished. It's been undergoing work all winter, with some woodwork redone to give it a little more character and warmth to this room. We'll have to hunt around for prints and real estate to complete the decoration. Back in the courtyard, we'll go to the chapel tower, which is really a part that was very little modified in the 19th century. So I like it because it's the rough part of Bridoire as we like it. Before climbing this beautiful spiral staircase, we'll enter the Bridoire chapel, which is unusual in that it was built at the very end of the 19th century, embedded in a 15th century level. So that's a bit crazy. It's obviously been completely looted, so all the stained glass windows have unfortunately been broken. It's a project that's close to my heart, and I hope to be able to finance it over the next few years. But the stained glass windows are costly, so we're going to start with the woodwork and redo the plasterwork in this chapel. The keystone features the Foucauld lion, as the Foucauld family were the ones who restored the entire Bridoire at that time. Here we take a beautiful spiral staircase, which unfortunately has been somewhat damaged since the steps were cemented over in the 50s, I think. But from the second part of this staircase, we managed to save some of the steps, which remained unaltered. So here we come to the end of this beautifully decorated staircase, which hasn't changed since the 15th century. We've got these ornate bases and this beautiful keystone that really hasn't moved. So it's really part of Bridoire's 15th century decor, which wasn't altered in the 19th century. So it's quite precious. Let's go back downstairs to show you the first floor. This section is still under repair, but it's good to stay busy. Visitors are also happy to see yearly progress, that we're able to look after Bridoire and renovate new rooms. Obviously, in 10 years' time, we haven't had the chance to be everywhere, so little by little the interiors are being refined and enriched. So here we are in what's known as Father Charles de Foucault's room, since the Foucauld family had a cousin who, what's more, has been canonized. So Father Charles de Foucauld came to Bridoire twice, in 1911 and 1913, and stayed in this room. You can guess why, because there was this platform, this balcony, that looked directly onto the chapel. So this was one of the last rooms that hadn't yet been restored. So here we are, restoring a fireplace and redoing the woodwork, which, as you can see, is still brand new. So it's going to be my little job, before the reopening in July, to be able to really rearrange this room, find the right furniture, and voila, finish it off to offer visitors a finished room. So here we see a little bit. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but you can see a little of the state the room was in. The fireplace was obviously broken, everything had been really damaged. So it's true that in this room, there was no woodwork. So we wanted, in fact, to redo a room that was a little warmer with woodwork. We're going to rehang a fabric on the wall, and so on. So it's part of the new fittings we hope to finish in a month's time. We'll move on to the curiosity cabinet, which was completed last month. So that's the part I like best. I love hunting for little accessories that are curious and catch the visitor's eye. So here we are in one of the chateau's bedrooms. Surprisingly, there weren't many bedrooms at Bridoire. So visitors are often curious, telling us, but it's amazing, given the size of the chateau, how they housed people back then. So it's true that there weren't many rooms, but this was one of them. It's said that in 1576, a future king of France came to Bridoire. It was Henri de Navarre, the future Henri IV. He came to visit Blaise de Pardaillon, who was the owner of Bridoire at the time. And so we imagine that he stayed here, or so we hope. In any case, he came for dinner. So now, for our Easter events, this room has been transformed into the Queen of Hearts room for Alice in Wonderland. We're really trying to innovate with our events and to offer slightly immersive tours every time. But don't worry, the sets aren't there all year round. It's only at certain times of the year, otherwise the chateau is back to its rooms without sits. So here's something neat. Just look at the size, the thickness of the wall. We are standing on the site of the former keep. So this is really what's left of the old 12th century keep. You can see from the width of the wall. Here we are in one of the large rooms of Bridoire, known as the weapons room. When the parents bought the property, this room had been separated and partitioned. There was a corridor here and 2 partitions that formed 3 rooms in one. When we saw the size of this fireplace, we thought that it was not the original setting. So we broke down all the partitions, uncovered the half-plastered fireplace, and by breaking the ceiling, uncovered these magnificent beams, which are really quite impressive. The whole ceiling was open to the sky, and we redid what we call the joisting to really recreate the room's original level. We'll now return to the stairwell, which will take us back to the entrance hall in a moment. As I said earlier, this section was designed in the 17th century. It's what's known as an Italian-style staircase, which really does turn at right angles. I invite you to follow me into the attic to see the beautiful framework and Bridoire's stature. In the 19th century, this stairwell had been plastered over, and when we arrived, there was graffiti all the way up to the ceiling. They'd either take a knife or a nail and write in the plaster. We decided to remove all the plaster. We've got this rough stone, and in time, we'll see if we need to recoat it. It's true that in the 19th century, walls were never made of bare stone. We're standing under the roofs of Bridoire with this beautiful frame. We were a bit lucky. The roofs were in pretty good condition when we arrived. This enabled us to devote the first few years entirely to the interiors, so that we could open to the public. 3 years later, we had to redo a small section. The old tiles were relaid and sorted to replace those that had been damaged. We also rebuilt the entire support, which was in danger of collapsing. So it was quite an impressive job, since we really had the whole chateau uncovered, the whole roof uncovered. Normally, we're good for another few decades, I hope. Now we're slowly making our way to the kitchens, which is one of my favorite rooms because it's so warm and lively. It's a kitchen we still use today for events. Everything works, so it's quite pleasant. This is the main room of Bridoire. These kitchens are unique in that they are all on one level. Generally speaking, kitchens are always in the basement. In this case, Bridoire is rather pleasant, as it opens directly onto the courtyard, with access to the wells and cellars we'll see shortly. A lot of work has gone into this kitchen. I found a small photo to show you the state this kitchen was in 2011, the year Bridoire was bought out. The floor had been partly ripped up and there were tags everywhere. There was nothing left but this sinkstone, which fortunately, given its weight, had stayed in place. We put back an 18th century roasting jack, which continues to work with this counterweight system. We have this rather impressive set of copperware. We usually like to get visitors to weigh in to see just how heavy things are. Impossible to lift with one hand. As you can see, it's a very warm and friendly room. And it's true that we love a good kitchen party for friends and family. Now that we've seen the kitchen, let's move on to another very pleasant area, the cellars. You can really see the direct access, the well coming out of the kitchens, and on the right, the cellar staircase, which is very deadly because the steps are particularly slippery. Let's take a look at the structure of Bridoire. You'll see the rock and the foundations of the castle. What's special when you go down, and this always puzzles you a little, are the loopholes. This suggests that the courtyard was originally at a much lower level and that it was filled in much later. Bridoire is still an enigma because when you have a castle dating back to the 12th century, there have been so many modifications. It's very difficult to date the elements precisely. Fortunately, there are historians who have studied Bridoire to some extent, but there are few archives, which sometimes leads us to make some not so obvious deductions. So a very, very fine level. These cellars are really quite impressive. Unfortunately, we don't have any wine in the barrels. We leave that to Montbaziliac, our neighbor, which specializes in sweet wines. But we do have a pretty good cellar with a very good temperature. So we could totally have wine. And then you can clearly see the rock on which Bridoire was built. I was explaining that in the 12th century it was really a small fortress built on a rocky spur overlooking the Dordogne valley, which was a toll gate under the authority of the lords of Bergerac. So we're really into the foundations of Bridoire. There's even a rather amusing anecdote from the wars of religion. It's said that the Protestants had imprisoned some Catholics, and in fact we don't know what happened because in the early hours of the morning the Catholics had disappeared, yet the door was well guarded. So we imagine an underground passageway leading from these cellars. Here we call it the prison, or rather the coup de basse fosse in French, because there was this wooden platform. We can also imagine that it could have been used as a cooler in those days, as food had to be preserved, and as it had direct access to the kitchen, it could also have been an option. Here we have a prisoner who unfortunately doesn't have enough visitors to bail him out. Right here, it's quite funny because if you look through the loopholes, you'll see that you're up high. We're lower than the level of the courtyard, but we're still high up, which shows us that the north side of Bridoire is really much higher than the courtyard. There really is a difference in level. We're now going to climb back up into the daylight to see the horses in the stable waiting for us. The stables were built in part of the common area in the 19th century. The Marquis de Foucauld really fitted out the stables with all the necessary comfort. Here you can see the entrance to Bridoire with its nice châtelet. The shape of all these outbuildings is quite beautiful since you can't really see it on camera, but it's a bit like an arc of circle. Here you can see the photos of Bridoire before, to give you an idea of the state it was in. Here the stables, will go there in a moment. Everything was broken. The dining room, there's the chapel with its broken stained glass windows. The altar was also badly damaged. And there the kitchen. As you can imagine, this is my room. It's my favorite part of the chateau because before we started loving chateau, we were all passionate about horses. In fact, it was horses that led us to this second passion for old stones. We're always very grateful to horses. It's always moving to have a stable that's still alive and inhabited, since most chateau stables are empty or converted for economic reasons, since it's also a maintenance cost. The horses are also used for castle events. They are all trained. We have horses and ponies of all sizes, and they're all trained to do animations with visitors. It's always a plus to have animals at Bridoire. Speaking of entertainment, we're just going to take a little tour outside the chateau to show you what breathes live to Bridoire. It's 60,000 visitors and it's wooden games. Bridoire isn't just a castle to visit, it's also a living, breathing castle. Bridoire is a castle of games. It's been 10 years that my parents had this idea to attract more visitors. It's what enabled us to welcome over 30,000 visitors in the first year. Now we've reached the 60,000 mark, which is huge, and we're continuing to develop this theme around wooden games. They're very convivial, intergenerational games, and that's very important. That's what really saved Bridoire, because Bridoire is still a small site and it really manages to do well thanks to these very strong games themes. I hope you'll have the opportunity to discover Bridoire for a classic visit, but also to try your hand at some of the games. In any case, I'd be delighted to welcome you. Thank you very much.